Thank you very much. You're going to see a very interesting contrast in the way that somebody who's, I would class as an academic, reports things and a pollster, and you'll understand when you've seen the two presentations. Okay, what I'm going to do is to give you a very short summary of the work we've been doing at IDS using something called the UK POM, which stands for UK Public Opinion Monitor. And then hopefully, depending how much time I have, sort of reflect on how our results compare to some of the other results that are out there, including from YouGov. Give you a bit of background to what we've been doing. We've been engaging in a significant amount of work trying to understand public attitudes towards aid and broader to international development. And the sort of background is, I mean, we're all interested in what the public thinks about aid and development. Traditionally, we've relied on polling data, and of course we tended to rely on the data in particular that DFID provided. We had this long time series, but that luxury has disappeared. That isn't the reason we launched our work, but it actually coincidentally happened around the same time. What we've been trying to do is to really get down to understand what drives the views that people have in the general public on aid and development. We've attacked it in two ways. One is a very qualitative approach using something called the Mass Observation Facility, which happens to be at the University of Sussex, where IDS is based. And this is a very unique instrument, if you like, which is a writing project where you basically pose questions to people and they reply to you anything from copious pages of typed response to handwritten with a fountain pen on pink notepaper. They can basically respond however they like. They give you basically a narrative of how they see the world. That's how we started out. Very qualitative, aiming to get at depth. The UK POM is in many ways exactly the opposite. What we've done with the UK POM is to establish a longitudinal panel. Around 6,000 people representative of the UK public. And what we mean by longitudinal is we ask the same group of people questions on an ongoing basis, and we analyse the data knowing how individuals have responded in the past. Okay, we've inflicted 14 questionnaires so far on the panel. I'm going to give you a sort of the potted highlights, if you like, of our work to date. Our focus is development, because that's what we're interested in, but we don't want to bias our panel. And we also want to know about what they think about the world more generally. So we've asked about all sorts of things, MPs' expenses, the Olympics, immigration, whatever, as well as lots of things about development. So these are... Okay, these are the, if you like, the potted highlights. We know that a significant proportion of the public support the principle of aid. That is, they think aid is the right thing to do, particularly in a rich country such as the UK. However, most people profess to knowing very little. Okay, that doesn't mean they won't tell you a lot. And I always show this particular slide, which was from our first study. This is somebody who said, I know absolutely nothing, and then proceeded to give us a diatribe about why aid didn't work. Okay? So just because someone doesn't know anything, and even recognises they don't know anything, doesn't mean they're not going to tell you a lot. Okay? What we've found out is we've asked people why they think aid should be given, if they think it should. And generally what comes through is that it should be about human rights and poverty alleviation. Okay? So those should be the drivers of what we spend and where we spend it. If you talk to people about aid, they tend to always talk about us and them. So they talk about giving aid to them and us giving aid. So there is this sort of divide between the giver and the receiver. And that's, you see that running through pretty much all, certainly our qualitative results. what we see is there's certainly evidence of a core group who are committed to aid, and almost anything you throw at them, which is a negative about aid, they still support it. But they're the minority, okay? A lot of people will swing, okay, in terms of their support for aid, where it's given, how much is spent, etc., according to how well it's spent and so on, at least their perceptions of that. We've done a lot of analysis of what drives support for aid and particular aid spending. We find demographics, apart from age, don't matter, okay? We found that wastage is a key factor, okay? Less so for the core group who are very committed, but generally wastage is important. If you perceive wastage, aid is wasted. There's certainly a strong sense of a trade-off between helping the poor at home and helping the poor overseas. And this is where the them and us come in. It's sort of like the us are the poor at home, and then a more distant us, sorry, them. There's a them, which is the poor at home, and then a more distant them, which is somewhere else in the world. And that concept of distance is very important. As well as that, benefits to the UK and a warm glow. I feel good about helping them is also important in terms of support for aid spending. We've been very interested as to whether people who support aid are those who also make donations, or whether those who don't support aid are the ones who make donations as a substitute. And we've tended to find they're complementary. It's the very same people, in general sense, that make their own donations that support aid. Okay. And finally, most recently, we've been exploring the role of values. There's a lot of interest in the role of values, as I'm sure many of you are aware. We have found that really only universalism, and we won't go into what they all mean, is the only significant one in the analysis that we've conducted so far. So the rest we found come out as insignificant. Okay. The key metric, and of course everyone wants a number, and that's the one we always talk about, okay? Our number, and the one that's been reported, when we initially started, it was 63% of people in the UK support cuts in aid spending. Now it's around 69%. We've adopted a very specific instrument where we tell people how much is spent on aid in pounds per person, and we ask them how government spending should change across 15 categories of spending. So we don't actually ask about aid, we ask about pensions, we ask about policing and all the other areas, and they tell us with all of those how they think spending should change, okay? And we get, I think we're probably at the more negative end of the spectrum in terms of perspectives on aid spending, okay? So that's the metric that we have, and we now have four repetitions of that particular measurement, okay? So that's our number, okay? We don't tend to emphasize the number because we're more interested in what drives it, but that's the number that many people want. Let me just very quickly reflect on other numbers, okay? Because in many ways you can get the number you want according to the question you ask. We tend to inform people quite a lot, and we contextualize aid in broader government spending, okay? These are the numbers that came from the DFID surveys, so they ended in 2010, and they basically asked, do you agree with the UK's government commitment to increase spending? So all that anyone is told is that there is a commitment to increase spending, which they may not have known. They don't know by how much, okay? But they know the commitment is to increase. And the number that they got in their the last survey, in terms of agreeing with that, was 47%. Okay, a bit more positive than us, but not that positive. These are the figures from a YouGov poll in March this year, and the question that was asked was, thinking about the amount of money that Britain spends on overseas aid, basically, do you think it's too much, too little, about the right amount? And 66% of people said too much. Of course, they've got no idea how much is spent, okay, but they've been asked to think about it. And we get a figure which is broadly along the lines of ours. Finally, the work done by Comres for the One campaign, which basically asked, next year the UK government plans to spend 1.6% of the national spending budget on international aid. Basically, do you think that's too high, too low, and whatever? And they found 61% of people supported that, okay? But important thing to recognise in this is that 63% of those people thought that the government planned to spend 2.7% or more. So it's actually less than what most people thought the government planned to spend. So I think you have to contextualise it in that regard. I would conclude that we know comparatively little about public attitudes towards aid and development. We know a bit more as we inch forward, but there's still a lot more to know. It's very difficult to get reliable estimates of the scale of support for aid spending. And we see that they're incredibly variable. We would suggest that, therefore, the predominant interest should be in what drives this. Particularly if you want to engage, you want to understand what underlies the support that people have or their lack of support. Okay.
Thanks very much, Spencer.